From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana, Siddiqui. First, the headlines. 2 million people fled Ukraine in 12 days. Rising oil prices causing lower Islamic bond sales as U.S. looks to mend relations. Proud Boys leader charged with conspiracy in U.S. Capitol attack. Iraqi National Museum reopens after 3-year closure. Hijab ban in Indian state continues to hamper girls' education. And first, hijab-wearing Muslim mayor of America. Our top story tonight. More than 2 million people have fled Ukraine since Russia launched its full-scale invasion less than 2 weeks ago, the United Nations Refugee Agency, or UNHCR, said. Poland alone has received nearly half of those Ukrainians seeking refuge. Tuesday's figures show 1.2 million people have crossed into the country in the past 13 days. Hungary has taken in over 190,000 Ukrainians. Slovakia received more than 140,000, and Russia has seen over 99,000 people cross over from Ukraine, data show. Here's Shabia Mantou, UNHCR spokesperson.
We have reached 2 million Ukrainian refugees in 12 days, and most of the countries that they're going to are Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, the Republic of Moldova, Romania, other European countries as well, and the Russian Federation and Belarus.
After several failed attempts, Russia promised Tuesday to open humanitarian corridors to allow civilian safe passage from Ukrainian cities under siege. Poland on Tuesday said it is ready to hand over all of its MiG-29 jets to the U.S. as part of efforts to provide Ukraine with fighter aircraft to defend against Russian attacks. Poland called on other NATO allies that have MiG-29 jets to follow its example. The British government said it will back up Poland if it provides fighter planes to Ukraine. The Pentagon on Tuesday evening dismissed Poland's proposal, floated hours earlier, to transfer its MiG-29 fighter jets to the United States for delivery to Ukraine. British MPs on Tuesday gave a standing ovation for Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky before he gave a historic virtual address to the House of Commons. Speaking via video, the embattled president spoke to MPs as part of his diplomatic push for more Western action against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. Zelensky said Ukrainians will fight in the forests, on the shores, in the streets, echoing a line from a stirring speech by British Prime Minister Winston Churchill during World War II. In a video addressed to 280 members of the U.S. Congress Saturday, Zelensky made a plea for the implementation of a no-fly zone. The U.S. and NATO have ruled out this option. Rising crude oil prices are expected to lower oil-rich Gulf nations' need to sell Islamic bonds, according to Moody's Investor Service. Higher oil prices will lead to lower sukuk issuance in 2022. Sukuk is the name for interest-free bonds. That's driven largely by lower financing needs among Gulf Cooperation Council countries, according to a report by analyst Ashraf Madani. Saudi Arabia, which needs oil pricing at about $72 a barrel to balance its books, said it expects to record a surplus this year. The ban on Russian oil is forcing the U.S. to revisit its alliances, potentially paving the way for sanctions on Venezuelan oil to be lifted. U.S. biotechnology company Moderna plans to invest more than $500 million in a vaccine and drug manufacturing facility in Kenya. Leaders of the African nation signed a memorandum of understanding with Moderna on Monday in the capital, Nairobi. The new facility will help address the problem of vaccine inequity experienced across Africa. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta said African countries faced challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic because vaccines were not available for them to purchase. The state-of-the-art mRNA facility will focus on drug substance manufacturing. It is expected to produce up to 500 million doses of vaccines each year. Spain's Supreme Court on Tuesday backed Twitter's decision to temporarily block the account of the Vox party for hate speech. The social media platform decided to block the far-right party from tweeting for 8 days in early 2021 during its electoral run in Catalonia. As part of its Stop Islamization campaign, Vox tweeted inaccurate statistics that Muslim immigrants make up 0.2% of Catalonia's population, but were responsible for 93% of crimes. After Twitter blocked the party's account for inciting hatred against Muslims, Vox decided to take Twitter to court. Now, more than a year later, the Supreme Court threw out Vox's case. Iraq's National Museum reopened Monday to visitors after being closed for 3 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic and political unrest. The museum features artifacts dating back 2,500 years to the Neo-Assyrian Empire alongside 9th century Islamic antiquities. Among the items back on display are 2 winged bulls from the Nimrud site in the palace of Assur-Nasirpal II. Prime Minister Mustafa Al-Kadhimi said Sunday the museum, founded in 1923 to display 5 millennia of history in Mesopotamia or modern-day Iraq, has undergone extensive extensive renovation. The museum has stood at its present site since 1966. It was ransacked amid the chaos following the U.S.-led invasion of 2003. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro signed a decree Tuesday providing for free menstrual supplies for low-income women and girls. The far-right leader signed the executive order at a ceremony for International Women's Day. The new decree will be funded by a budget of $26 million, reaching an estimated 3.6 million people, according to the health ministry. Menstrual poverty is a major crisis in Brazil, where women unable to afford tampons and pads often resort to scraps of cloth, diapers, bread, or whatever else they can find. A lack of menstrual supplies keeps 1 in 4 girls home from school each month, according to a 2021 report by a United Nations Foundation program, Girl Up. Several hundred feminist activists participated in a die-in on International Women's Day in front of Paris's Père Lachaise cemetery for victims of femicide. In Paris, several thousands marched against gender violence and for equal pay. They began the rally with reading a letter from Russian feminists urging activists to take a stand against the war and called out sexual violence. In Athens, Greece, roughly 2,000 people marched through the streets, chanting slogans against deadly violence against women, as well as denunciations of the Ukraine invasion. In Central America, hundreds hit the streets of Guatemala's capital, calling for an end to violence and corruption. And in Pakistan, roughly 2,000 women rallied in the eastern city of Lahore. We're bringing more news stories after the break, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. Brothers and sisters, we all watch the Allahu Akbar lady from India. She's amazing, isn't she? She is neither compromising her hijab nor her education. She is standing tall. We must stand with her. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect her. But it is not just hijab, brothers and sisters. Indian Muslims are facing genocide.
Genocide that we face in India is not a new phenomenon. India has had several genocides.
They are attacked every day. Even the Indian government admits there has been more than 1,800 organized attacks on Muslims, but they call it riot. 660 people are hanged to death in India, lynched in broad daylight, sometimes just because they were accused of eating beef. Yes, accusation of eating beef can kill a human being in India. We cannot remain silent, can we? Alhamdulillah, OIC has spoken, that is good, but why in the world United Nations is silent? The UN has a responsibility to protect. It has a duty to prevent genocide. Sisters and brothers, we must stand with Indian Muslims and other minorities. We are free, they are not. We are not attacked, they are under attack day and night. Let's do our job. I have signed this UN petition. I ask you to sign it now. Thank you so much.
Georgetown University in Qatar, a Qatar Foundation partner, has put out a call for papers for a new book project on Islamophobia. Global histories and practices of Islamophobia will contribute new and original research on the understanding of Islamophobia, examining its historical roots, according to a news release. The project is led by Georgetown Associate Professors of History Abdullah Al-Arian and Karine Walther. The initiative is part of research efforts at the university's Center for International and Regional Studies. The project aims to explore global, historical, theological, and political dimensions to develop a picture of historical precursors to current Islamophobic practices. The deadline for paper abstract submissions is March 15th. When 18-year-old Hiba Sheikh went to her government first-grade college in Mangaluru to sit an exam on gender equality, she was barred from attending. A group of male Hindu students allegedly told her to leave the college campus because she was wearing a hijab. Sheikh told the Quint some of those who prevented her from attending belonged to the student group affiliated with India's ruling BJP party. She pledged to continue to fight for my right to wear the hijab. The Hindu students cited an interim order issued by the Karnataka High Court on February 10th, barring students at government colleges from wearing religious attire. In related news, 30 years ago, Diqa Dalak fled her homeland of Somalia before the start of a devastating civil war that lingers on. Last December, she made history, becoming America's first Somali-American mayor and South Portland, Maine's 11th woman mayor. She is also the first African Muslim mayor in Maine and South Portland, whose population is 90% white. Her election last year was the culmination of a lifetime of community activism and civic service. Dalak helped create a Somali community center in Lewiston, Maine. She has worked in the Maine Department of Education, was board president of the Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition, and is a board member of the Maine Women's Fund. She has also served more than 5 years on the South Portland City Council. The leader of the far-right Proud Boys group has been charged with conspiracy in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol, the Justice Department said Tuesday. Enrique Tarrio previously served a jail sentence for burning a church's Black Lives Matter banner in December 2020 and for bringing high-capacity rifle magazines to Washington, D.C. That occurred days before the U.S. Capitol attack. The superseding indictment includes several other members of the Proud Boys already facing charges for actions relating to January 6th. The Justice Department said Tarrio and his co-defendants conspired to corruptly obstruct, influence, and impede the certification of the 2020 presidential election vote. Meanwhile, a Texas man who is the first to stand trial among those who breached the Capitol was found guilty Tuesday on all charges, including obstruction of an official proceeding. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
I am what hunger looks like in America. I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September.
I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table.
I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. To discuss President Biden's decision to ban oil imports from Russia and the recent hike in oil prices, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Samana. Pain at the pump is real, Gas prices in my neighborhood are already $4.89, and every day I pass by, it is going up and up. How high will it go? Is it because of war with Russia and Ukraine, or is it because of inflation, which was ongoing? To discuss all of that with us is a professor who is Associate Professor of Economics at Denison and President of the Global Institute of Sustainable Prosperity, Dr. FADHEL KABOUB. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Thanks for having me back on the show.
So tell us, some people are saying more expensive gasoline is a small price to pay for freedom and defending against tyranny. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, this is not the first time that we experience significant increases in gas prices. And to be honest, adjusted to inflation, these gas prices are not as high as what we've experienced in the past. But the political and geopolitical climate is different. So there's a lot of direct association between high gas prices and the conflict that's happening in Europe between Russia and the Ukraine. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. The inflation pressures that we've seen in the U.S. started long before this conflict. Of course, the conflict fueled the speculation that there will be shortages in oil output and as a result in gasoline products and petrochemicals, because Russia is the second largest exporter of oil in the world after Saudi Arabia. So that's the speculative aspect of it. But the deeper issue that we should be discussing in this country and in Europe, to be honest, is why have we not done anything in the last several decades, especially in the last decade, to move away from dependence on fossil fuels, to really push for a much higher energy efficiency in general, reduce our consumption of fossil fuels in Europe in particular, which is completely dependent, almost exclusively dependent on Russian oil and gas imports. Those are the questions that we're not discussing. And as of right now, in the United States, even if we ignore the issue of climate change and fossil fuels and all of that, what is really interesting to observe here is that the U.S. production capacity, there's plenty of room for the U.S. actually to increase its output if we wanted to do that. But who's blocking the increase in output? It's actually the oil and gas industry, because they're actually enjoying this little panic because that allows them to enjoy the high prices to make up for the losses from the last 2 years of the pandemic. They're not interested in increasing production. They're also enjoying exporting to Mexico, for example, at higher prices, because Mexico's gasoline consumption, 50% of it comes from the US. So there's the question of abusive market power that nobody's willing to tackle here. There's also the fact that the federal government imposes a gasoline tax of 18 cents a gallon. And a lot of people have been arguing, well, maybe this is the right time for a federal gasoline tax holiday to ease the pain on working class consumers. Maybe this is the time to think really carefully about how we build a national public transportation system that allows working class people, middle class people, not to rely on fossil fuels to begin with, and use clean and efficient public transportation, at least in the largest cities in the country. These are the questions that a lot of people are asking today. And of course, these are not issues that we can resolve immediately. These are issues that should have been done when we were talking about the Green New Deal a few years ago, and decarbonizing public transportation, investing in renewable energy. All of those questions that we ignored and we shoved under the rug for years now are coming back to haunt us now. And it's unfortunate that policymakers today are not trying to think forward. We're going to probably muddle through this crisis and have the working class and the middle class pay for this pain, and then have another crisis in a few years and start over again.
Considering that, Russian oil in America is only 4%, but how much of the Russian economy is dependent on oil export?
Oh, the oil and gas industry is the biggest engine for the Russian economy, which is interesting because when we started talking about imposing sanctions on the Russian economy for invading the Ukraine, the sanctions were very carefully designed not to touch the oil and gas industry and not to touch the largest financial institutions that actually deal in oil and gas exports. So it was a slap on the wrist, so to speak, in terms of targeting the yachts of oligarchs and targeting banks that don't really do much in international trade, but carving out those sanctions in a way that doesn't hurt the Russian oil and gas industry, not because we wanted to protect them, but because Europe was so heavily dependent and is still heavily dependent on Russian oil and gas imports. In the US, it's not a big deal. Our oil imports from Russia are minimal. And to be honest, most people are saying it turns out that quite a bit of those imports are actually Venezuelan oil that was kind of circumventing the sanctions on Venezuela and coming through to the US through Russia. But I mean, we have to be serious in terms of why this conflict started in the first place. What prompted this geopolitical problem that was shoved under the rug from the days of the Soviet Union, and that's been brewing for a number of years now, starting with the invasion of Crimea in 2014. So all of these problems, most of the public, kind of in the public discourse, it's assumed like these things that just popped up out of nowhere. And Europe had nothing to do with it. The US had nothing to do with it. It's very important to acknowledge that this has been a long time in the making. That doesn't mean that Russia is right, or it's just unfortunate that the Ukraine and the Ukrainian people are the victims of this big power struggle between the US on one side and NATO, and Russia on the other side.
So that is my question. I mean, it is very clear that if the NATO and America are not going to enforce the no-fly zone, there is none. They're not going to directly involve, and there is a wisdom that people don't want it to accelerate into European and the World War, so they want to limit it. But instead of just by providing small arms to Ukrainian, which allow nothing but their misery to continue, why not have a compromise with the Russians so they have their interests fulfilled on the Ukraine and civilians are safe?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, the fact that the weapons that are being provided to the Ukrainians to defend themselves are not useful enough to actually repel the invasion, but they're sufficient to conduct a long and painful and bloody street-to-street kind of conflict and war, means that we're, from a NATO perspective, it sounds like NATO is very comfortable with the Ukraine being in a long and bloody quagmire with the Russians for a number of months. Possibly years, and from a NATO perspective, if that is the thinking, then they're very happy with the quagmire that drains Russian resources and military capabilities in this conflict. But that also means that NATO is okay with sacrificing the Ukraine and the Ukrainian people in this process, and that to me seems like what's actually happening, despite everything we say about supporting the Ukraine and freedom fighters and independence and the heroic fight that the Ukrainian people are fighting. If we meant a true support for the Ukraine, it would have been supporting them to begin with military capabilities that would have repelled an invasion, not wait for the invasion to happen and then supply them with minimal amount of relatively light military capabilities to continue to keep this conflict in motion.
Well, do you think somebody has opened up the old book of what America did to Soviet Union in Afghanistan by allowing Soviet Union to bleed? Do you think there is a plan to allow Russia to bleed like this?
Well, I mean, that's why I said this is unfinished business from the Cold War. The Cold War was no direct confrontation between the U.S. And the Soviet Union, but it was indirect confrontation in Vietnam and Korea and Afghanistan. And now it looks like this is yet another episode of this quagmire type of situation, conflict of the Cold War era, with no direct confrontation between NATO and the Russians, but indirect confrontation, in this case, by having NATO support the Ukraine to directly fight the Russians in the Ukraine. And the victims of this conflict are always the countries in the middle, whether it was Vietnam or Korea or the Ukraine in this case, unfortunately.
Do you think that the anti-climate change movement will be able to enhance the discussion and conversation about oil dependence, taking advantage of the current situation?
Of course. One of the things you'll notice happen immediately in Europe, in Germany in particular, as soon as the conflict started, all of a sudden Germany was able to, put together $100 billion to increase its military spending, defense spending. Whereas 100 billion euros, as a matter of fact. Whereas before the conflict, and when climate change activists and advocates and scientists are saying, Germany and the EU, you need to invest more in renewable energy, you need to invest more in alternative sources for transportation, for heating and cooling. And what did Germany say at the time? We don't have the money. We can't afford it. So we have to keep depending on Russian oil. They were in fact building a second gas pipeline from Russia, which was stopped as soon as the conflict started. So this idea that we don't have the money and we can't afford it, it turned out that green energy investment and energy sovereignty is actually the cheapest, safest, fastest, and most peaceful national defense policy for Germany. And that is the reason why Germany and the Europeans insisted on not imposing sanctions on Russian oil and gas. Now, if Germany and the EU had renewable energy sovereignty, we would have imposed sanctions immediately. There wouldn't be a question about imposing sanctions to cripple the Russian economy immediately. And that would have been the part of the calculation from Russia's perspective before they even invade. But because they knew how much Europe is dependent on them, Russia knew that they could do it without anybody imposing severe sanctions on their economy.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. FADHEL KABOUB, for your time.
Thank you.
Back to you, Samana.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.